This is it. Last lecture for this course for this quarter. Our last theorist is considered a theorist of globalization, and that theorist is Immanuel Wallerstein. Immanuel Wallerstein. So, born in 1930, passed away in 2019. He wrote The Modern World System in 1974. This is the first of 4 volumes dedicated to the study of the global capitalist world economy. These ideas were influenced by the ideas of Marx, of Polanyi, and of Günter Frank. So, in the modern world system, it presents a theory, Wallerstein presents a theory of global stratification, just as stratification can be studied or analyzed in terms of internal to a given society or nation state. Wallerstein's analysis showed, of course, that we could analyze global inequality, right, as a system of stratification, and nation states or countries occupying different positions, say class positions, within the global capitalist order. When I was an undergraduate, I remember signing up for a course, and the course was called The Modern World System. I thought, oh, that looks cool, I'm going to sign up for that. The entire class, and this was a semester system, the entire class, that is 14 weeks, was spent devoted to studying Wallerstein's Modern World System. I didn't know quite what I was signing up for. I was just like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. So it turned out that my professor was pretty close with Wallerstein, and the work that his scholarship, his research, sort of fit within the paradigm of the modern world system. And so my professor studied also global stratification, but as it impacted environmental systems, that sort of thing. Anyhow, yes, it is. I don't. Do I remember all 14 weeks of material? We must have really gotten into the weeds. We must have really gotten into the weeds of the modern world system during that course. I mean, that's 14 weeks. It's a long time to spend discussing this, but we did. So, an important distinction to be made, of course, that Wallerstein presents us with is that of world empires and the world economy. The distinction between world empires and a world economy. World empires of the past were networks of societies ruled by and integrated through political and military domination. So the integration of societies, of just say populations, right? That was based on political and military domination. So examples that Wallerstein presents are, say, the incomparable Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire, and the spreading of the Roman Empire, of course, through political conquest, right? Subjugating populations. The whole empire ran off. Slavery, the oldest systems of economic production. So with the expansion of the Roman Empire, of course, populations were subjugated, turned into slaves, turned essentially into workers to sustain the material demands of the empire. So the Roman Empire, Chinese, and Ottoman empires are examples of world empires. However, Wallerstein tells us world empires declined. They declined with the rise of what he calls a world economy. World economy. World economies, this is what makes world economies different, according to Wallerstein, to then world empires. World economies are not structured according to political rule, but instead are based on economic exchanges that extend beyond the politically defined boundaries and control of any state. So it's economics, not politics, that is the integrating force, right? So, for example, there are very important political differences between American political institutions and Chinese political institutions. However, these two societies are greatly integrated economically. Right? So the points of contact, so to speak, or the connections of these networks of populations in a global economy are predominantly economic. So important political differences between the players, so to speak, of the world economic system, right? But it's on the basis of economic production, distribution, exchange, and consumption that leads to the integration of these societies, or nation states. Right? There has been but one historically sustaining world economy, and that is the capitalist one. That is the capitalist one. This is a world system characterized by a plurality of states and political authorities. Once again, there is not, say, a homogeneity as it relates to states and governments and political interests. That in that respect, there's a great degree of variation, a great degree of heterogeneity. It's unity, then what is it that maintains the unity of this capitalist system? Its unity is provided by an international division of labor and unequal political economic relations. So just as we can analyze a division of labor within society, Wallerstein's telling us that there's also a global division of labor that exists as well. And it's the global division of labor that links nation states to one another. And nation states have different locations, right? Have different locations in this global capitalist hierarchy. Since world economies lack the unifying cement of an overall political structure or common culture, what holds them together is the efficacy of the division of labor. Interesting, right? Because it's a little bit Marxian and it's a little bit Durkheimian. It was Durkheim, I was just talking about this the other day, who studied the sources of social solidarity. And it was Durkheim's argument that what maintains social solidarity in modern societies is a complex division of labor, right, that leads to very specialized tasks or labor functions, right? But it's a state of economic interdependence that provides a society such as ours with social solidarity, that we are interdependent, right? So he's saying the same thing works for Wallerstein, saying that's what holds the global world order together, is this intricate division of labor. But what Wallerstein highlights and what makes his theory Marxian as opposed to strictly Durkheimian is he's looking at the power dynamics that exist between the countries or the nation states that participate in this capitalist world order. And this efficacy is a function of the constantly expanding wealth that a capitalist system provides. We are in a capitalist system only when the system gives priority to the endless accumulation of capital. That is, in fact, the purpose of capitalism as an economic system. Capital, Marx writes that capital is a particular form of wealth. It is wealth that is used to reinvest into economic productive activity in order to do what? In order to produce more wealth. So capitalism is a mode of production that produces capital. The logic of capitalism is to produce wealth. Now, in the process, of course, you're producing things. You're producing commodities, you're producing goods, you're producing services. But it's really to sell those commodities, to sell those services in order to generate wealth. So the point of capitalism is to generate wealth and an endless accumulation of capital. The never-ending drive for profit is the central objective for participating in economic production. Socialism operates differently. Advocates for socialism would say you produce goods and you offer services to meet the needs of individuals within the society. That it's needs-based. All production and consumption directly correlates with meeting the needs of a population. So it's an economic system. Socialism is one in which you're purposefully, intentionally meeting the needs of individuals. That is different than the objective of capitalism, which you can meet the needs of individuals in the process, but a corporation would say, our job isn't simply to produce goods or to offer services. Our job is to produce profit, to generate more wealth. So using such a definition, only the modern world system has been a capitalist system. Wallerstein provides us with a historical account of the rise of the capitalist world order. So once again, as we've been doing this, has been pretty common for the last couple weeks. We've been talking about the periodization, right? That there are periods of time. So here we have the, say, long 15th century, as it's been referred to before. The formation of a European world economy. The world system began with the emergence of a capitalist world economy during the 16th century. So during this period of time, from 1450 to 1640, we see the formation of a European world economy. By 1640, there became a stabilized predominance of world market trade controlled by northwestern European states. From 1640 to 1815, during this period of time, there is a consolidation of the European world economy. So the major players in this European world economy were Holland, or the Netherlands, Britain, Belgium, France. Initially, it was Holland that assumed hegemonic status by virtue of its advancements in shipbuilding, textiles, and the fishing industry, and its impressive naval power. So typically, it were referred to countries with a strong naval presence, which was both necessary for military purposes, but also for economic expansion, right, for the spread of merchants and the spread of global capitalism. So initially it was Holland. From 1815 to 1917, during this period of time, there was conversion into a true global world economy. It was made possible by new technologies and the rise of modern industrialism. So new technologies, particularly in the forms of transportation and in terms of communication. And then the forms of new productive technologies, of course, captured by the term modern industrialism. Basically, the use of machines, the invention of machines. Steam-powered, oil-powered machines which enhanced production, producing more and more goods than have ever been witnessed before, leading to an expanse, an accumulation of wealth. Great Britain replaces Holland as the global power. And New Amsterdam becomes New York, right? I lived in New York City for 2 years, and it's just all these, there's to the history of New York City. There's the Dutch influence is very clear, right? But no longer, of course, named New Amsterdam, but New York. But there are streets, of course, and sections of New York City, such as Harlem. Right? Harlem, that's a Dutch word, right? So great in a neighborhood, a district in Holland and Netherlands. So Great Britain replaces Holland as the global power during this time. And from 1917 to 1960, we see the rise of the United States to world hegemonic power in the modern world system, largely as a result of World War II and the dominance, the economic, the military, and even cultural dominance, clout of the United States on the international scene. That after 1945, the contending industrial powers were really in ruins, that Europe was in ruins and Japan was in ruins. A number of other competing industrial nation states were destroyed. But with the exception of, say, Pearl Harbor, right, the United States, enormous loss of American lives, of course, during World War II, but in terms of an infrastructure, the infrastructure within the United States was still intact. And most of the countries that participated in World War II, their economic infrastructures were annihilated, were destroyed. So the rest of the world, of course, is having to rebuild. The other that were once competing nation states and industrialized countries were having to rebuild during this time, and the United States had an enormous economic advantage by not having to rebuild its infrastructure, but simply augment and advance it. Right? And they could certainly do that. And also the United States played a very important role in building the economies that were destroyed during World War II. So, critically, this last period includes the consolidation of the capitalist world economy and the particular revolutionary tensions that this capitalistic consolidation provoked. For example, the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution in 1917 involved the overthrow of the Tsarist aristocracy and the establishment of communism. Wallerstein interprets this event not as the beginning, say, of a form of an economic mode of production that can, say, give capitalism a run for its money, but rather sort of a momentary response, a reaction to capitalism that would, in less than a century, collapse. However, these 20th century revolutions only signaled internal tensions within an ever-expanding capitalist world economy. This is a symptomatic, in other words, say the emergence of communism can be seen as a response to the overwhelming power of expanding capitalist world order. And in a response to it, signaling a tension, but with, again, less than 100 years later, this competing mode of production collapses, which is communism, right? In 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down, and in 1991, there is the collapse of the USSR. And with it, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, right? And all of these countries that were part of the Soviet Union from roughly 1945 on, they all sought their own independence, just as, and we still see these tensions playing out today between, say, Ukraine and Russia, right? That Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the collapse of economic and political power of the Soviet Union, then you had a number of these states seeking their own political and economic independence from Russia. An economic system that emerged from the crisis of feudalism, which is capitalism, now dominates global society. So very much, quite different, right, than what Marx and Engels had predicted in the Communist Manifesto. That they made a very bold claim in the Communist Manifesto that the fall of the bourgeoisie and the supremacy of the proletariat was inevitable. It was inevitable that because of the internal contradictions of capitalism, that capitalism would be eliminated as a mode, as a system of social organization, economic, political organization would be eliminated. We've seen really quite the opposite. We saw the emergence, the growth of communism, but slowly but steadily the demise of communism. Wallerstein conceives of the capitalist world economy as divided between three zones. It involves the core, the semi-periphery, and the periphery. So these, you can think of these then as different locations of nation states within the global capitalist hierarchy. Just as there are different classes, right? Working class, middle class, upper class, and internal to any society. These refer to nation states within an economically stratified order. Societies can be classified roughly as belonging to one of these zones. Just as we could say that any given household belongs to one of three class orders. So the zones refer to positions in the world economy. The zones refer to the positions in the world economy. What we mean by a world economy is a large geographic zone within which there is a division of labor and hence significant internal exchange of basic or essential goods, as well as flows of capital and labor. Capital, of course, is critical for investment, for hiring people. I mean, the investment capital is critical in hiring the people who have human or cultural capital that can create an enterprise or a firm, corporation, or a business. Right? So you need capital to start businesses. And then out of those businesses, you have the production of goods and services. And if the firm or business or corporation is operating as it should, then in the process of selling goods and services, it's profitable and generates more profit and more wealth that can be reinvested in productive activity. And the idea, of course, is that through refinement, we're able to identify more efficient ways of producing. And with greater efficiency and productivity, you have greater accumulation of wealth. Core, semi-periphery, and periphery societies, or nation states, countries, represent different positions in the global division of labor. different positions. So we can think of these then as class positions. At the center of world capitalism are core societies. They are economically, politically, militarily, and culturally dominant in the world system. Core societies are economically diverse, technologically advanced, involve highly capital-intensive economies operated by cadres of skilled, educated laborers, and are centers of manufacturing, commerce, and finance. So technologically, how do they become so technologically advanced? Well, again, that has to do with wealth, the investment of wealth. Education, of course, factors centrally into core societies. Core societies usually have some of the most, if not the most prestigious universities, which are then used, right, to produce new knowledge and to transmit that specialized knowledge to the next generation, providing that population with a competitive advantage over populations, say, in semi-periphery or periphery countries. Further, core states are characterized by a high degree of internal political stability, and they also are known for maintaining strong, advanced militaries. Domestic relations are stabilized by a welfare system, while militaries protect foreign investments. So these societies, or core nation states, are characterized as being high-income societies with a significant share of the population pursuing and achieving higher education. I think we have about a third, I believe about a third of Americans hold bachelor's degrees. So that's a sizable amount of the population. So educationally advanced and also characterized as cosmopolitan. So urban, very urban. We have important urban, our urban centers are the centers of commerce, right? So the cosmopolitan character of New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles, right? That these cities are important cities for a variety of reasons, of course, educationally, culturally, but these are economically important, right? And often involve concentrations, enormous concentrations of capital within those cities, right? Or think of Wall Street, right? Centered in New York City, and the amount of money, the trillions of dollars that pass through Wall Street on any given day. Right? Core states are rivals. They compete with one another for hegemonic status. Establishing hegemony means maintaining economic supremacy in the different sectors of the economy and sustaining military and political dominance over other core nations. So the idea is that the wealthiest societies that provides population with the highest standard of living, of course, are in a position then to attract the greatest human capital, to attract, say, the best and the brightest, right? So, I just read an article about, China has been seeking to attract engineers, American engineers, right, that have worked in the field of AI, and they're offering an enormous amount of money to come work for us. Come work for us. share some of that human capital that you have, AI, with us, right? It is one of Wallerstein's chief aims that core societies need weaker, subordinate societies to dominate and exploit. So this, it's very clear the minute we see that word, exploit, exploitation, it's Marxian. Right? As Marx said, at the heart of capitalism is what? It's exploitation. Surplus value. Surplus value. And what is surplus value but profit, right? Marx said that workers are never getting a full return on the market value of their labor. Right? You're going to get, by law, you have to get compensated for your labor. At minimum, you'll get minimum wage. You can be paid, of course, much more than minimum wage. But whatever you get paid, Marx says, if you're not the owner of the business, firm, or organization, there's still surplus value that your labor is producing, and that surplus value is the profit that the owner of the business, by law, has ownership of. Right? This is all sort of Marx, the significance of superstructure by superstructure law. Capitalism is an economic system, but an economic system that is legitimated and justified by the rule of law. And what's the most important rule of law? Ownership of private property. This is my business. That's my name on those documents. So the profit goes to me. And if workers say, wait a minute, we're in a recession. You just gave yourself a 20% raise, and the board of directors 10% raises, but yet you fired 1,000 people. How can you do that? And the CEO can say, because I lawfully can do it. I have the right to do it. It's my company. So if I want to fire people and give myself a raise, I can do that. And of course, it becomes a problem if, say, it's a publicly traded business, and investors get nervous and think, well, maybe this isn't the best way to spend money. But that's what makes legitimate, right, capitalist production, is the right to own private property and therefore have a legitimate right to the lion's share of the rewards of the productive process. The exploited societies belong to the periphery. These societies or nation states are economically specialized, even monocultural, labor-intensive, and technologically underdeveloped. Their economies in the periphery, their economies may be reduced to the role of producing one product or providing raw materials and cheap labor to core nations. So the opposite then of a highly diversified economy. The American economy is a highly diversified economy. Even the economy in Los Angeles is a highly diversified economy. And typically the more diversified the economy is, the more stable it is in terms of economic shock waves or whatever it might be. If it's simply an economy is a one-trick pony, then you've got a problem, because if it impacts that economy, then everybody who's associated with that form of economic production is going to be impacted. So the more diversified an economy is, typically the stronger that it is, the more it's able to absorb economic shocks in the form of, say, recession, an economic recession. Such societies also have weak and unstable states. It is not uncommon to find authoritarian states propped up or installed by core states. Many periphery societies have histories of colonialism due to lands being rich and in raw materials. So, for example, rich in cotton or sugar, rubber, oil, gold, diamonds, timber, etc. And so these societies become part of the global division of labor in terms of resource extraction. So Marx pointed out a long time ago. It's like capitalism will spread to every corner of the planet in pursuit of what? In pursuit of cheap resources and cheap labor. Why is that? Because when you are able to access cheaper resources, cheaper labor, then that simply lowers your cost of production and enables you to extract more wealth through the productive process, which then, through the reinvestment of wealth, you can improve and make more efficient productive activity. The exploitive relationship between core and periphery societies leads businesses of core nations to appropriate these natural resources. So that professor of mine that I was referring to, he studied the extraction of timber, right? Resource, wood as a resource. And what that leads to, of course, it leads to deforestation. So he was interested in sort of, his research was in the subfield of environmental sociology, but how this type of economic arrangement leads to deforestation, right? And the destruction of a natural resource. And then what? And if, of course, there is a way to maintain timber, but if timber is not maintained, if new trees are not planted, of course, then you don't have any more lumber and you don't have any more. And the businesses that went in there to extract the timber, they say, okay, well, looks like we chopped down all your trees, so it's time to go. And off they go. And they go to another region with plenty of timber and they start to destroy that timber. It's parasitic, to say the least. So an example, and there are plenty of, it's virtually limitless in the number of examples that we can point to. Chile in South America, colonized by the Spanish in the 16th century. The indigenous population was militaristically and politically subjugated. Slavery was established to do what? To extract Chile's natural resources for, and this is textbook definition of exploitation, for Spain's economic benefit. So to extract Chile's natural resources for Spain's economic benefit. In 1818, Chile gains its independence from Spain. Later, however, Chile's natural resources of nitrate, copper, silver, and coal attract foreign investors from Western Europe and North America. So Chile, in other words, has their political independence, has secured political independence from Spain. However, it's these natural resources that attract the attention of global capitalists. One of those individuals was Englishman John Thomas North, who became the nitrate king. He gained near total control of nitrate resources in Chile. Now, you might wonder, well, what is the value in nitrate? Well, the value of nitrate is it's used in agriculture. It's used for growing crops, right? So to replenish the soil so that you have a higher yield, a higher crop yield. And of course, the greater the yield, the greater the sales and capital and profit that's produced. So in 1884, North owned and controlled 34% of the nitrate sector. By 1890, it was 70%. So again, Chile has political independence from Spain, but it's John North, an Englishman, who was able to secure control of 70% of Chile's nitrate resources. Prior to the British, Peru owned only 13%. The case of Chile demonstrates how core societies use their hegemonic status to extract resources and wealth from peripheral societies, effectively taking control, not so much political control over the society, but taking economic control over the society. And Marx would say, it's not in the game of capitalism. The game of capitalism, there are winners, but there are also losers. Right? That this mode of production does not benefit everybody equally, that it benefits some more than others. And it comes down to, well, what is your class location? So Marx talked about the money to commodity to money circuit, that if you're a member of the upper class, part of the bourgeoisie, meaning you own the means of production, you participate in a particular circuit. And that circuit is MCM, that you use your money, you use your capital to produce commodities that then you sell to produce more money. And so if you have money and you invest it in productive process, you can make more money and you can grow your money. But that is a result of occupying a particular position, of being an owner of the means of production. But if you don't own the means of production, you have only your labor power, then you participate in the CMC circuit, where you sell your labor as a commodity to make money, just to buy commodities again. So what you're doing is you're just simply working to buy commodities to stay alive, right? You're not actually making any wealth. You're not developing wealth. That's sort of how Marx described it. So, and again, this is the result of one's location, right? Your relationship to the means of production. So this is an example of exploitation, of being situated in a different circuit. So who benefits, right? Where does that capital go? That capital, because of the resource of nitrate that's extracted, right? The money that is made, some of that money, just as the minimum wage labor gets some money, some of that money is paid to the workers or those that oversee, the managers that oversee the process of extraction. But the vast majority of wealth goes to what society? It goes to the core society. In this case, it goes to England. Right? Finally, the third zone is referred to as the semi-periphery. So we have the core, we have the periphery, and the semi-periphery. Societies that belong to the semi-periphery share features of both the core and periphery. So you can sort of think of the semi-periphery as almost a middle class, right? That the periphery would be the working class, core societies would be the upper class, and then we have the semi-periphery, nation states or countries that are somewhere in between. They often have relatively weak states and economies, but the key feature of these societies is that they serve as a buffer for the core nations. So they serve to stabilize. The chief dynamic of the capitalist world system is the conflict between nations driven by socioeconomic inequalities. While core nations compete for hegemony, the central dynamic is the exploitative relationship between the core and the periphery. The core extracts surplus value from the periphery and exercises social and political dominance in order to sustain economic exploitation. This world system dynamic creates wealthy, powerful nations on the one side and poor, weak nations on the other. So it's very similar to Marx and Engels' assessment of the effects of capitalism in the mid-19th century, based on first-hand observations. Right? There were the industrial millionaires, those that had enormous wealth, but there were also those populations that found themselves in a perpetual state of immiseration, which is just another way of saying poverty. So Marx and Engels observed firsthand the bifurcation of this process. Some people, again, benefit handsomely from capitalist production, others don't. And it all comes down to one's location in this hierarchy and the types of resources that are commanded and controlled. The development or underdevelopment of a given society therefore depends on the structural position a society occupies in the capitalist world economy. The position. This position in the global division of labor determines its power on the international stage. So Wallerstein then sees some countries as being predators and other countries as being prey. Right? The periphery societies or nation states are vulnerable. Politically, they're unstable. Militaristically, they're weak. So they're vulnerable to outside influence or dominance. Such relations of dominance and exploitation between nations are justified by ideologies of free enterprise, democratization, and social progress. So, say Western societies may commit military resources to helping a society transition from an authoritarian regime to a democratic regime, and can say this transition is in the spirit of freedom and building a representative democracy, right? And ensuring individual protections, liberties, constitutional rights, etc., etc. Right? The cynic, of course, would read this as, well, it also enables, right, foreign investment in domestic economic operations, right? The free market, free enterprise, which then can lead to the extraction of resources from that society. Wallerstein did not anticipate the collapse of the modern world system. There is little likelihood, he wrote, of revolt in core nations. Working class movements in Western nations are unlikely to experience political radicalization. What is the tool? What's the resource that can be used to placate those that are agitated with the status quo? Well, if you're a core country, that means that you have ample reserves of capital and wealth. It also means that you have more or less, depending on the allotment of material or monetary resources to this institution, but you have a welfare state. You have a welfare state. They can say, sort of take the edge off of capitalism. But the point is if you have resources, if you have money, right, you can use this money, right, to combat political radicalization. Another professor of mine, I started one class, said, why have we never had in this society a true socialist movement, a true socialist movement, true socialist party? Because of labor unions. That's why. It's because of labor unions. Labor unions were the compromise. Capitalists said, well, we're either going to, if we don't do something, we're going to lose capitalism as we know it, and we're going to have in the place of privately owned enterprise production that is controlled by the state. In socialist societies, that's what you see nationalized industries. Nationalized meaning what? Nationalized meaning government controlled, government owned, and government regulated. Right? Now that's the greatest fear to any capitalist, is the fear that industries will no longer be run by private individuals, but they will become owned by the government. And once that happens, well then, how can one, get access to it? Through, I guess, the government bureaucracy. Right? So anyhow, back to the working class. Sorry, back to the labor union. So the labor union was a way out. It was a way of saying, well, we can prevent the rise of socialism from, say, government takeover of industry. We can give workers what they want, meet their demands. So maybe one demand is to get an improved hourly wage. Okay, meet that. Maybe one demand is to get more sick days or to get more vacation time or whatever it is. So in other words, that has been the compromise. Labor unions have been the way in which capitalists have compromised with those that say seek socialism. Rich core nations can afford to raise the standard of living of workers and create elaborate systems of welfare and provide relative social security for most of their citizens. So wealth is power because you can steer people's behaviors, we talked about, through providing rewards, incentives. The economists will say, it's all about, you want to boost sales? Okay, well, lower the prices of your commodities, provide for a limited time, a reduction of, 20, 25%, whatever. You provide incentives, meaning you're providing rewards. You're lowering costs and you're increasing rewards, and that can modify consumer behavior. So this is the oldest form of behavioral modification known to humankind, right? Maximize rewards, minimize costs, as we've talked about. So societies that are wealthy and have ample monetary rewards can use those rewards to prevent, say, political or economic rationalization. But in societies where those resources aren't available, it's like, well, then if it's sort of the will of the people to create a socialist society despite the interests of some capitalists, then there's nothing they can do about it. Lastly, while there were many movements that emerged in the 20th century against core nations, they were often anti-colonial struggles intent on establishing national independence. As we talked about, these societies can become independent, but just because they're politically independent doesn't mean that they don't participate in the global capitalist order. And so, okay, Chile, you want your political independence, you can have that. But we're still taking your resources. We're still going to extract economic resources for our benefit. That is, they were opposed to colonial powers, not necessarily to the capitalist world economy. Not necessarily to the capitalist world economy. All right. Final exam, Tuesday, December 10th, this year. I always put that up just in case. The student says, well, you didn't specify the year. I thought it was Tuesday, December 10th, 2025. 3 to 4:15 p.m. I provided you with the details of the exam. It's the content, of course, is different. The final exam will cover material discussed from weeks 6 through 10, but the number of questions is exactly the same. You have 3 short answer questions. Everything is the same. You're able to finish that in an hour and 15 minutes, so you'll have an hour and 15 minutes to complete this exam. It will be here. Sometimes this stuff varies, right? They change the location of the final exam, but we don't have to make any major changes. We're going to be back here in this room, 2:20 on Tuesday, and that's it. All right, folks. I will see you next week.